Hey, this is Ron Coddington, the editor and publisher of Military Images magazine. We are coming to you from Military Images headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. It is a July day in 2019, and we are bringing to you season 2, episode 12. And I'm very pleased to be doing that. We're going to pause here for just a couple of minutes to let folks come online and tune into the show. We've got some great things to share with you this evening, and very excited to be able to talk to you about all the latest developments that have been going on. For those of you who are new to the program, Military Images has been doing the show for a couple of years now, and it's all based on the magazine that was founded in 1979. So we're on our 40th anniversary. So doing some shout outs here. I see Doug York is here. Michael Passaro, who we met in Gettysburg last week. Mike, how are you doing? Jeff is here. Ann Coddington is here. Fred Taylor is here. And the list is going on and on and on. I see lots of fireworks, which seems completely appropriate considering this time of year. While we're waiting another minute or so for folks to come on, I want to talk to you about Soldier Collectibles. That is a website that sells a bunch of things, including Civil War images, toy soldiers, engravings, books, and related items. The place is owned by Ben Pauly. I met Ben a few years ago. He's an awesome guy, has a great website, and lots of good things to sell. So if you like images, and I know you do because you're tuning in this evening, check out Ben's site. He's been a great friend to the magazine, and we're very proud to be a supporter of what Ben's doing. I should also mention that Ben has co-authored some books with Chris Anderson, and you can look them up. I suspect they may be available on Ben's website. So do check it out. Now, I want to share with you tonight, and as you guys know, I usually talk about some of the latest news that's been going on, and by far, probably the biggest news has been the announcement of a new organization, the Civil War Photo Collectors Society. We announced it in Gettysburg last weekend, and this is a brand new organization. It is the brainchild of Doug York and yours truly. For those of you who don't know, this is something that we've been talking about for a long time. Doug might chime in here and tell us exactly how long that's been going on, but we've been talking about it for a while. And we had a couple of discrete experiments along the way, beginning with the Gettysburg Gathering and then the DC Photo Show, where we brought together collectors and speakers to educate, raise awareness, and talk about Civil War photography, and of course, also offer a place to buy photos. So we're very encouraged by these events, and that got us thinking about the importance of community and the idea of making it into something larger. And then earlier this year, I began an experiment that ended with a traveling exhibit of Civil War photographs, specifically of African-American soldiers at the Ashtabula, in Ashtabula, Ohio, at the Hubbard House Museum. You've heard me talk about it on this show before. And it's an example of where we actually reached out to the community to bring these photographs to help educate folks. So the website for this new organization is Civil War Photo Collectors Society.org. Since we announced the society last weekend, we've had a bunch of really great questions from those who are interested in becoming a member. And I thought, gosh, it would be great to be able to share these answers with all of you. So in no particular order, I'm going to run through these questions quickly, just so you get a sense of what the community has been talking about. The first question, what will the new society do differently than all the resources that are available now? Well, there's really two major things that we're going to do that's different. And first, before I answer that, I should say, to my knowledge, this is the first time that anyone has attempted to put together an organization for Civil War portrait photography. So with that in mind, there's two things that we can do, and they both tie into the experiments that Doug and I have done. First, we're going to be able to bring shows to various places across the country. Part of that is piggybacking on existing shows. We've done this in Gettysburg, and we did this at the DC Photo Show. But we also have plans to go to different parts of the country where the Civil War photo shows don't normally go. One of them is going to be this fall in Kansas City. You've heard me talk about that before. We're going to be piggybacking on the Daguerrean Society, or I should say partnering with the Daguerrean Society for that show. We're also talking about having a show in Texas and looking at other locations. So the idea is to be able to take the show on the road and to get into communities where you usually don't see Civil War photography. The other thing that we're talking about doing is based on our experience in Ashtabula, and that is bringing traveling exhibits to various communities. Now, you all know that these photographs are incredible entry points to talk about the Civil War, to talk about history, to talk about Americans, and to talk about how this country was founded and what the country is all about. Well, a great way to do that is to bring these photographs to towns across the country in the form of traveling exhibits. So imagine your town, you may have a local historical society, you may have a public library. Imagine a show coming to one of those locations along with images, along with captions, along with an opening, a show opening. You might see Doug, you might see me showing up to be able to talk about photography. So that's a big thing that we've got planned. Second question. How does the society connect to military images, Civil War faces, and Civil War faces marketplace? Well, I'm the editor and publisher of Military Images, as you know. Doug is the editor of Civil War Faces and Civil War Faces Marketplace. These organizations are going to remain independent and separate from the Civil War Photo Collector Society. So they're separate organizations and they will be handled separately. They will continue to exist as separate entities. Next up, what is the incentive for longtime collectors to join? Well, it's a great question. And I know from talking to many of you that you've expressed concern about what many of you call the hobby. And that is, how about bringing in more young folks, more younger collectors? How about the idea of being able to teach history and to bring history to different places? I know that you've all had concerns about the future. And Doug and I both feel strongly that the society can be a place to reach out. And we're going to do that through all the ways that I mentioned, plus doing it through social media, as we're doing tonight on this Facebook program. So we're really excited about bringing some new ways to communicate and reach out and be able to create new contacts so that you veteran collectors can pass along all of the knowledge and all of the great experience that you've amassed over the decades. Now, two more questions, and these are related. Where does the money go? Well, what I didn't mention up front is there is a fee, and that fee depends on if you're an individual, a family, a student, and you can find those prices on the website, civilwarphotocollectorssociety.org. The money that we collect is going to go to pay for the events that we're talking about. As you might imagine, they all have costs, and we want to be able to raise funds to help to pay for them. So your dollars will be put to that work, to that use. And if you're wondering, the follow-up question, how will you account for the money? Well, we're going to be very transparent about it. We are a nonprofit organization. A shout out to Fred Taylor for helping make that possible using his wise legal counsel. So we're a 401k, we're a nonprofit, and we'll have an annual statement that tells you exactly where the money goes. And I should also mention that the money is not in any way mixed with military images, with Civil War faces, or Civil War marketplace. Those organizations have separate budgets, and the money for those organizations stays in those organizations. Any money collected for the new Photo Society will stay with the new Photo Society. So those are the questions. I'm going to post this on the new website and encourage you to go and visit. Thanks for listening to all that. If you got questions, let us know. Now, I want to take you to this photo. You may have seen this on Facebook. I believe it was last week. It's an African-American man. He is wearing what appears to be a heavily gilded oval belt buckle. All of his buttons are gilded in brass, and you can see some blue chevrons which indicate his rank of corporal. Here's a closer look. Here, you get a better view of those chevrons and a little bit of hint of all the brass buttons. To make the photo even better, on the inside of the case is a signature in pen, and that signature says Aaron M. Hall. Now, turns out there was an Aaron M. Hall that was in the 29th the 29th Connecticut Infantry. This image was the subject of a story by Matt Hagen of Museum Investments. And here's a title of Matt's story: Buyer Beware. An article by Paul Matthew Hagen of Museum Investments. And Paul has to say this: with the upswing in popularity of historical images of soldiers, I made a recent acquisition of what was reputed to be an African-American soldier of the 29th Connecticut Infantry, Corporal Aaron M. Hall. At the time of purchasing, I was told he had a period ID, and from the first image, you could see I had no reason to doubt the authenticity of the item. When it arrived, however, I immediately could spot that the image had been doctored to deceive. The seller was 100% honest, and Matt does not want to disclose his name, but the dealer, the moment he found out about it, he gave Matt a full refund. Now, the image was found at the Brimfield, Massachusetts Antique Show. The seller that Matt notified provided the full refund, as I mentioned. And he goes on to say that the dealer who bought it really had little time to look it over and didn't notice that it had been doctored, but Matt did. And to add to it, this image was found on Pinterest that actually shows the untouched image of this man. And as you can see, there are no chevrons. The buttons that were on his cuff are missing. None of the buttons have been gilded. And of course, there's not even a hint of a belt buckle. So I want to say a big thanks and a big shout out to Matt Hagen for bringing this image to our attention. With the number of fake images that have proliferated the market, it's as important as ever to be aware of what's going on. If you're new to collecting images and you're concerned, reach out. Matt, for example, is very willing to help. You can find him on Facebook. And also don't hesitate to contact me, Doug York, Ben Pauley, other folks who hang out on Civil War Faces, on military images, other Facebook pages, and elsewhere on the internet. So a lot of this community is built on relationships, and we watch out for each other. There's no question about that. So reach out to us and let us know if we can help. The next image comes from Rick Wolf. I got to visit with Rick twice in the last couple of weeks, first in Morgantown, West Virginia, and also at Gettysburg last week. when he shared this image with me, my jaw literally dropped. It's in absolutely pristine condition. And as you'll see, it's a wonderful image of a gentleman who is wearing a full-out Confederate officer's uniform. He's holding his greatcoat. He has his slouch hat rakishly perched on his head. The double rows of brass buttons. His officer's insignia is up on his collar. He's wearing some high knee boots, and you've got the photographer's name across the bottom, coming from Wheeling, West Virginia. Now, when you first see it, what else are you going to think but the fact that this is a Confederate officer? Seems to be absolutely no question about it. That is, until you turn it over and look at the back. The back says it appears to be CET or CEJ. These are initials. Next to those initials, it says Chief of Scouts, Major General Milroy's Division. Now, those of you who know the Civil War know that Milroy, I believe it's Robert H., was a Union general and division commander. So what are we really looking at here? We are not looking at a Confederate officer. We are looking at a scout, a chief of scouts who is dressed in Confederate clothing, perhaps to mask his identity. One thing that occurred to me immediately is, gosh, why would this guy take such an amazing risk to dress in this kind of uniform and be out on the field and risk being risk having a connection with other Confederate officers who might be wondering, who is this guy who's dressed as an officer? Shouldn't I know who he is? The more I thought about it, I realized, you know what? In that part of the world, in West Virginia, Tennessee, there's a lot of action going on, a lot of small actions, a lot of patrols that are out there. And gosh, it's really easy that this guy could probably ride around for days and days and days and not really encounter anyone. Or if he did, he'd be able to mask his identity enough so as to not get caught. So we're looking for the ID of this guy. And as you might imagine, scouts kept a low profile and weren't widely discussed. Although you certainly can find writings and other evidence that they existed and played an important role in both armies. So if you know who CET or CEJ is, please reach out to Rick Wolf, leave a note, leave a comment, leave a post on this Facebook page, and we will get this mystery hopefully figured out. Before we leave the Chief of Scouts, I want to mention an image that I believe we showed last year on the show, and it also ran in Military Images as part of Buck Zeidel's gallery. That was back in the winter issue, if I recall. And very similar situation. We have a soldier here with a carbine. He appears to be a Confederate private. He's got all the trappings of a Confederate private, including another rakish hat and the long boots. Now, at first glance, that is, of course, what he looks like, but he really is a soldier named William Shirley, who served in the 2nd West Virginia Infantry, a Union regiment. He was detached for scouting duties. So I love the connection here. Here we have a private who looks for all intents and purposes like a Confederate, and he's a Union guy, documented. And then we're looking at this image as a Confederate officer in Milroy's division's head of scouts. So interesting connection there. So when you're looking at those photos and you see those Confederate uniforms, check the back and make sure it doesn't say scout on it. Now, I've got a couple of requests. I should say that I always get a number of requests for folks who are looking for images of family members. And I have two to share with you tonight that caught my attention. First, this is the Burris family And this comes from Nikki Hunter. I'll put this on our Facebook page. She's related to the Burris brothers of Iowa, 8 brothers that served in the Union Army, all in Iowa regiments. So if you can read this, you'll see Benjamin in the 1st Iowa Infantry, Joseph in the 7th Iowa Infantry, John in the 17th Infantry, and 5 more brothers, Jacob, Daniel, Stephen, Miles, and Samuel, in the 19th Iowa Infantry. So if you were an Iowa collector, or if you have Iowa CDVs, ambrotypes, or tintypes in your collection, have a look. We're looking for the Burris brothers: Benjamin, Joseph, John, Jacob, Daniel, Stephen, Miles, and Samuel. Nikki Hunter is looking to find her family. I hope you can help. Here's the other image. This request comes from Carol Scanlon, and she is looking for information about Thomas A. Scanlon. He was born in Boston. He enlisted in the U.S. Navy in December of 1862 at all of 16 years old. He served on the Ohio, the North Carolina, and the Roanoke. He mustered out as a first-class boy at the end of the war. If you know of an image of Thomas A. Scanlon, he would have been a young kid, 16, 17, 18. If you've got an image of Thomas A. Scanlon, Carol wants to know. I believe Thomas was her great-great-great-grandfather. So let's see if you can help Carol out. Speaking of sailors, I want to go into this last section of the evening. I want to share with you a couple of images from the recent Gettysburg show. We had a mobbed table, and I don't say that to brag. I'm just telling you, it was mobbed from the very moment the show began all day. I scanned a record number I scanned images from a record number of folks who brought images to be scanned. All told, 28 people over 2 days came by to scan images. And I haven't even counted them all. I've barely started to look through them, but there's some great material for future issues of the magazine. And you'll probably see a couple of them on the program, as you're about to see right now. And I want to start out, since we left with Thomas A. Scanlon, the sailor, I want to start out with a sailor. And this is a post-war image, which is absolutely just crazy fun to look at. And he's identified as W.H. Hardy. And you can see he's standing against a backdrop of ivy. He's got a bunch of medals pinned to his sailor uniform. You cannot miss the Santa Claus beard and, of course, his cap. And it turns out that by 1917 or so, this, I believe he was a landsman, promoted himself, or was affectionately known as Commodore Hardy, as you can see up here. And I want to tell you just a little bit about him. Let's go back to this great photo so you can appreciate that while I'm reading. This comes from his 1919 obituary. He was in his 80s when he passed away. It says, Commodore Hardy was the last surviving member of the Perry expedition to Japan in 1853. So if you know the Commodore Perry expedition, that was something that started with President Millard Fillmore opening up Japan to the quote-unquote Western powers. He is on the ship with Perry, and apparently the last member of that crew to survive. It says he was an ardent patriot and attracted much attention on the streets and at public meetings during the late war with Germany. Now we're jumping ahead to World War I. So he's still alive during the Great War, and he attracted a lot of attention at these meetings when he appeared dressed in his old sailor costume. So apparently Hardy was wearing the costume you see here, or one like it, out in public and telling a story. Now, it goes on to say, in 1917, as the war, World War I is going on, It says one of the crowning achievements of Hardy's career was his journey to Japan in the autumn of 1917 as the guest of the Friends of America, a strong Japanese commercial and political organization. He spent several months in Japan visiting all the principal cities and speaking before thousands of people. Hardy was received by the Emperor and Empress of Japan and was entertained at the homes of prominent statesmen and financiers of the country. He was immediately popular with all classes in the flowery kingdom and was given the sobriquet of, quote, the grandfather of the Japanese people, end quote, a term of endearment which he praised highly. It goes on to say that he did have some Civil War service. He left the Navy after the Perry expedition, served in the Navy during the Civil War, came back in for various engagements along the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, and then he left the Navy after the war was over and donned his uniform again after the war. Settled in Portland, Oregon, all the way out in the Pacific Northwest. It says here, he was an earnest patriot, deeply religious, a lover of outdoor life, and most popular with boys and girls of the public schools. So there you have it, W.H. Hardy, William Howard Hardy. Great photo, great story, with a great Civil War connection and a Perry connection. Next image is from the John Fuller collection. At first glance, you're going to see a big oval with something going on in the middle, and then a bunch of small images around them. Those small images are portraits of soldiers, and what's going on in the middle here is this. It is a very tasteful arrangement of brass instruments, all stacked in the middle. There's a couple of drums to elevate the horns, and you have different size horns all stacked around. Now, what makes this image even better than this really interesting still life of horned instruments is the little placard here, and it might be hard to read from where you are, but it says Iron Brigade Band. So we're looking at Wisconsin here, we're looking at the Iron Brigade, and then what you might not see is each of these portraits are numbered, and on the back are the IDs of all the men in the brigade band. So a lot of research to be done here, but a really unique image that you will see with more information and a future image, a future issue of Military Images. All right, this one from the Charles Darden collection. Gosh, there's a lot going on here. We have what appears to be a Union soldier, and in fact he is. It has a Philadelphia backmark of O.H. Willard. What first catches your attention, and you can't help but see this, is his rolled up trousers exposing his bare feet, and his feet, from what I can see, look to be absolutely filthy. This guy's been out in the mud, the muck, or the dirt, or just barefoot. I'm not really sure where he traveled, but dirty feet, trousers rolled up, and then he's loaded with equipment. He has a sword, which doesn't make any sense because he's wearing a private's jacket. He has what appears to be a non-commissioned officer's belt buckle. He's got two pistols, a carbine strap, and what appears to be a sort of a civilian private purchase hat. So my best guess here is that you may be looking at a soldier who is loaded down with some props. Not really quite sure. More research needs to be done, but wow, quite a fascinating photograph. I've got one more to share with you, and this is from the Larry Wandling collection. And at first glance, you have a fairly standard pose here of a Union soldier who is sitting, resting a hand on a chair back, holding his cap in his hand, and no backmark. Now, if you look close up at the hat, you're going to see a big clue as to who he is. And it says, Company I, 1st Wisconsin Heavy Artillery. So we have a face, and we now have a company and a regiment, Company I of the 1st Heavy Artillery. As for the date, that is maybe maybe we can get a date here. He's wearing a pin on the chest of his jacket, and you can see that right here. Here's the buttons of his jacket, and here's the pin. Now, it's really hard to tell who the pin is or who is pictured on the pin. So I'm looking around trying to think who it might be. Is it a general? Is it a political figure? Is it a member of the family? But what you can see here is, curiously, this person, their body seems to be turned one way and the head is facing the other way. The head is looking out in this direction and the body is pointed in that direction. So I thought to myself, I feel like I've seen this somewhere before. And I looked up and I found this 1864 election button for Abraham Lincoln, who has sort of that same pose. He's looking off to this distance, and then his body is facing the other way. And would be actually hard pressed to say for sure that it is him, but certainly there's some resemblance between this portrait and this portrait here. So again, more work to be done, but just a few of the interesting finds at the 2019 Gettysburg Show. And with that, I'm going to leave it here for the evening. I want to thank all of you for watching and for paying attention. And also thank you for all that you do for supporting images, for supporting Civil War images, for history, for collecting, for being caretakers. And we'll be looking forward to seeing you at the next episode of Military Images Live. And with that, I wish you a great evening.